Are the authors of the New Testament reliable, or are they just liars? Let's talk about it. For over 2,000 years now, it seems that everyone has been talking about Jesus and an informed decision about Jesus. This is the biggest decision of my life, and let's investigate Jesus together. So previously, we have talked about that the documents themselves in the New Testament are reliable. The claims, meaning the claims that have been made about Jesus, are the same as they were from the start. There's no game of telephone that's happened where one claim was originally made and then over time that evolved into something else. And we've talked about that in a previous video. You can check it out here or you can check it out in the description below. But the question right now is, how do we know that they weren't lies from the beginning? That the original claims weren't lies, that those who made the original claims, Jesus' followers, how do we know that they weren't liars? Especially when we talk about like a resurrection of not just any body, but a crucified body. How do we know they weren't liars? The authors themselves even acknowledge that some influential people of the time, Jewish leaders and others, Roman guards, accused them of being liars. We may look at that in the future. And I just want to remind you that we're not looking for mere possibilities. We're looking at what is most reasonable. And I want to just give you 3 reasons that we can see how these authors were actually really reliable. The first is that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. They had nothing to gain from lying and everything to lose. Let's explore this a little bit. So my background is in accounting. I have an accounting degree. My career began in public accounting. And some projects let me just say most projects in public accounting, I found really boring. The ones that I found really interesting were fraud projects. I got to work on a few different fraud projects and actually really liked it because you get to have a little bit more motive behind what's being done, a little bit more of like who done it and why type stuff. And one of the most basic things that you learn when it comes to fraud is what's called the fraud triangle. There's 3 elements of fraud that make up this triangle, that all 3 elements have to be present for fraud to take place. There has to be a motive. The one who is trying to pull off fraud, there has to be like a clear motive for why they would do this. Rationalization is the second one. And then opportunity. So let's look at each one of these, motive, rationalization, and opportunity, and just see what might be the why behind why they would have tried to pull off a fraud. Let's look at motive. Have you ever lied before? I have lied before, many times actually, and whenever you lie, you're lying to either get something or to get out of something. To get something or to get out of something. You know, to get something in their case, and this is the case in many cases of fraud or scandals, it's about money, it's about women, and it's about power, right? But if you look at history and you look at even them describing their own lives in the New Testament, you compare both what we know about history and in the Bible, we know that if they were trying to lie about the resurrection in order to get money, women, and power, quite the opposite happened. In fact, those who even joined the movement later, like Paul, who we'll explore in even more detail in future videos, he actually became poor, celibate, and gave up power. And that this is consistent with many of the other leaders who claimed a resurrection. So when you look at the motive to get something, they didn't get anything. They gave up a lot. We might say, well, what would be the motive for getting out of something? What were they trying to get out of? Maybe they were trying to get out of the embarrassment of following a guy for 3 or more years and then only to find that he wasn't who he claimed to be and he died. And now they just wanted to save face. So we're just going to make up this resurrection in order to save face. It's possible. But again, we're not just looking at what's possible. We're looking at what is most reasonable. So when it comes to the motive, we need to dig into that a little bit and understand that a little bit better. The second is rationalization. And I think there could be, we always rationalize things, right? And sometimes we rationalize ourselves into making bad decisions But in this case, maybe they did have a good rationalization in that they are Jewish men, most of them, with the exception of Luke, who's a Greek doctor. Maybe they rationalize, hey, Rome is oppressing our people, and then we also have these Jewish leaders who put Jesus to death, and they're kind of in bed with the Romans, so to speak. And so we want to make up this lie about a resurrection in order to embarrass them, in order to kind of stick it to them, in order to cause, social unrest or something. I don't know. Again, you can kind of rationalize anything. So you could probably come up with several different reasons that they might rationalize lying about it. But the third element is opportunity. And when it comes to opportunity to actually pull off a fraud, to lie and pull something off, it requires knowledge and ability. You have to know how to do it, and you have to have the ability to do it. So in their case, consider what all they'd have to do. They would have to steal a body that was actually under guard, a Roman guard. They'd have to steal the body from the Romans. They'd have to hide the body where no one could find it. And then they'd have to all agree, 11, 12 guys plus a few others, that they would never break that lie. They'd have to be consistent. Even when they were questioned multiple times, they'd have to be consistent and never falter from that lie. Consider now that 2,000 years later, we are still talking about it. It means that no one was ever able to find a body. No one was ever able to point and say, hey, here's a clear reason for why you guys were lying. Does that make sense? I hope that it does. Either way, I hope you get the idea. They really had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and they actually did lose a whole lot. Moreover, reason number 2 is that they included personally embarrassing details in their accounts. Personally embarrassing details. So the night that I met my wife, Reagan, I saw her. I thought she was beautiful. I tried to make a move and ended up calling her Megan. I thought her name was Megan. I ended up calling her Megan the whole night. Now, when I tell the story of meeting her, I often don't include that detail of calling her Megan. Why? Because I would love for you and others to think that I got this beautiful woman because I'm so smooth and was able to, win her over with my charm. That is not what happened. I called her the wrong name all night, and later it was rather embarrassing. My point in saying this is whenever you're going to tell a story of something, you often consciously, subconsciously, either way, you end up taking out personally embarrassing details. Doesn't feel good to tell things that are embarrassing about your life. And when these authors were writing down for all to read, they were writing all of this account of Jesus' life, how they followed him around, what they did, their interactions with Jesus. They had many opportunities to take out some of those personally embarrassing details. Instead, they included them. I can give you one example right now of one that's really prominent, is Peter, who became one of the primary leaders of the Jesus movement. Jesus had told him when he was predicting his own death and resurrection, Jesus had told Peter that you are going to deny me, Peter, 3 times. And Peter's like, I'm not going to deny you. But of course, he does do that. And he even rains down, damnation upon himself as he's trying to put distance between himself and Jesus when Jesus had been arrested. It only was later that Jesus came back and forgave him. Peter could have excluded that and, the account wouldn't have changed a whole lot. Instead, Peter included that to say, even I didn't believe that this was possible to begin with. Even I was afraid. Even I tried to separate myself from Jesus. But in the end, he actually was who he said he was, and I'm willing to be embarrassed in front of the whole world and all of future people who I want to know this. Does that make sense? Another thing is, if you're going to make up a big lie. You're going to make this big claim that you want people to believe. You're going to go find the most respectable person that you can who is going to testify to that, right? But, you know, in the first century, really, that would have been an educated man. And yet, in all 4 accounts of the resurrection that we have in the New Testament, all 4 accounts say that it was women, and not just women, but a prostitute. So again, if you're going to make something up, you want to go find an educated man. First century would have been an educated man. You want to find somebody who's really respectable. Instead, they say who reported the resurrection first was a woman whose testimony would have not seemed as credible as a man's in the first century. More than that, it was a former prostitute. So they included personally embarrassing details in their accounts. Why? Well, that's how it happened. Number 3, the third reason why we can rely on them, why they weren't lying about this, is they didn't break under intense persecution. They didn't change their story under intense persecution. We've already looked at the Jewish historian Josephus and his account about Jesus and his followers, like James, the brother of Jesus, who became a leader in the Jesus movement. We've also looked at Tacitus, the Roman historian, and how Jesus and his followers, like the authors that we're examining now, and the people who accepted their claims believed in it so much they were willing to lay down their lives. Both Josephus and Tacitus, their accounts corroborates with the accounts in the New Testament, like Luke's account in Acts, of how when there was persecution, when there was trials, when there were people who were questioning, they didn't back down. Does that make sense? I mean, the authors were beaten, they were imprisoned, and many of them eventually executed. Like James, the brother of Jesus, was stoned because he said that Jesus was resurrected and he wasn't willing to back down from that. Paul was beheaded. Peter was crucified. You can kind of go down through the list. Here's the point, and this is the bottom line of everything I'm trying to say when we're trying to understand, were the authors themselves liars? Well, they gave up everything for their claims. They gave up their jobs. They gave up their reputations. Many of them gave up relationships, and they gave up their own lives. Who would do that for a lie? To them, Jesus' resurrection was a truth worth dying for, you know? And some people might say, well, maybe they were just crazy, you know? Maybe these guys were just crazy. Well, if you look at the accounts, and again, we'll do this in future videos, we'll look at their accounts, and each one of them has a very clear outline and literary design, and the cost of writing these documents back in the first century would have been exceedingly high. You know, you might be able to call them radicals in a sense, but you can't call them crazy. They were very intelligent in the way that they laid this out. You know, but if you're going to call them radical, I mean, how radical are they really? They believe that they saw someone predict their own death and resurrection and pull it off. To them, these were truths worth dying for. And my hope is that at some point you will see the evidence for the resurrection, and that you'll accept the resurrection, and that you'll see that believing in Jesus actually gives you hope of your own resurrection one day when your life is over. But my objective right now is to help you make an informed decision about Jesus. So these authors are making claims about him being the Jewish Messiah, the Son of God. But what did Jesus think? Who did Jesus think he was? What did Jesus claim about himself? We're going to talk about that in this video right here.